Okay. We are live.
Live.
Are you on there?
Cool. Just sorry, it's refreshing my end. Well, hello, whoever is out there, as we are just going live. My name is Bryant Francis. I am here today with Chris Graft, Alex Warrow, and Tim Keenan. We are here today to stream Duskers. If y'all want to introduce yourselves again, real quick, because I just did it for you there. Sorry. Yeah. Tell us who you are and why you're here.
I'm Gamasutra editor Alex Warrow.
I am editor-in-chief of Gamasutra.com, Chris Graft, and you can't see my face today.
I'm Tim Keenan. I'm the developer of Duskers, and before that, a virus named Tom. And I'm just new here in this room. This is going to be exciting. I'm going to throw a wrench in everything.
Yeah.
Good.
We like wrenches, sort of.
I can be your wrench, sir.
Whoa.
Okay, so I'm just going to start kind of playing this game. This game is great. It really lets you kind of like role play in real life because like your monitor is the monitor that is used by the kind of person who's in the game, if you know what I mean. So Tim, can you kind of tell us a little bit about Duskers and what you do in it?
Yeah, sure. I guess Duskers it's sort of a genre-bending game, so it's not as easy for me to give like a marketing spiel as I should be good at this by now. But yeah, so you pilot drones into derelict spaceships to try and figure out why everybody's dead, and you do that with a command line interface. There's a lot of decisions that we made in the game that are very much around like a retro tech aesthetic and feel. A lot of things in the game are supposed to make the game feel real, as ridiculous as the screenshots look, and like give you that sense of immersion. Also, we were going after a sort of sense of isolation because everyone is dead, and trying to make you feel bad deep down inside about that.
I feel bad deep down inside no matter what, so I can't tell if that's the game or if it's just me.
Yeah, it must be the game. I mean,
Definitely.
Yeah, and so it's a roguelike sort of RTS, but like a really slow boil RTS. Kind of, people talk about XCOM because you're switching between units that are the drones, but it's real time, but it's in a way, there's also a lot of deduction in the game. Like what you're doing right now is, using a motion scanner, and so you want to make sure that rooms are clear. There's also a lot of kind of what I would call like low fidelity information that you get. Like, you know that there's something moving in that room, but you don't know what or where exactly in the room it is. And so we use that to create a sense of tension and essentially sort of like survival horror. I'm just all over the map.
I just had
with
D5 wide open there. That was dangerous, right? Because something could have maybe come in right through there.
Well, actually, so the first room, we usually give you the first room safe and an open door to another room they're always safe at the beginning.
Okay.
So
thank you.
that's something to know. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can viewers can see me right now. I'm just kind of switching back and forth between, like right here, I can actually control each drone individually, and you can press spacebar, and everything here is done with the keyboard, which is really cool. So I'm just pressing spacebar to switch back and forth, and right now one of my drones has a motion kind of ability, motion sensing ability. The green rooms are clear. There aren't any baddies in there. The other ones, there might be. I don't know.
Chris may die on the stream, and when you die in the game, you die in real life.
Yeah, that's how most games work these days.
Yeah.
How do you feel, Chris? Let's go ahead and roleplay. Who are you and why are you investigating this hole?
Yeah, so I was tweeting about this like a week or so ago, and I really like these games where you're sitting at the screen and the player screen is the game's screen. Like right now I feel like a low-wage search drone operator, sitting here with a cup of coffee, just kind of just kind of doing my job here. I know that sounds goofy, and it it kind of is, but it's effective. And like what Tim was talking about, that immersion factor really plays into it.
Yeah, what's really interesting is that sort of one-to-one, and I was actually giving a talk at just a Fantastic Arcade, and I was trying to think about like what I was going to talk about, and the things that really surprised me in the game, as the response to it, was how strongly like our artistic intent came across. Because I'm used to, as an artist, if you will, like, you know, putting stuff out there, and you trench it with all this stuff. And usually, like, you know, a lot of people either don't get that or they get that after you tell them, you know. You're like, the game is designed around, like, feeling isolated and all this stuff. And then people are like, oh, yeah, I guess I kind of felt that. So for like, to get articles, you know, from, like, you know, Wired or Ars Technica or Killscreen talking about, like, that sense of feeling like they're actually the drone operator and feeling, like, that sense of immersion. And all the things we were going after, like isolation and like all this, like, you know, kind of vibe that, like, you know, all this tension is really incredibly gratifying. And so I think that one of the things is that as the game was going along, like, there were these different sort of design pillars, if you will, that started to formulate as we kind of discovered the game. And I kind of feel like the game, in a way, and this is a very bad way to design a game if you know, have a very tight budget and are scoped perfectly to make like the sequel to this.
Oh my gosh, Tim!
Yeah. So this is a lot of things that, like, in the game, this is one of the things we wanted to do. I wanted to make it so that instead of like having these jump scares, where this thing, like, you're gonna have these like tense moments, like you've got like a minute to figure out what you're gonna do at this point, right? And so it's long enough and short enough, you know.
Matt is
to
alone.
Kind of build that tension.
Yeah. Actually, that's one of the questions I had. You just mentioned design pillars. Can you, you know, you mentioned isolation, and you got this immersion factor going. Can you talk about other guidelines that you followed?
Yeah. So the thing that you're talking about with like the one-to-one, that essentially came out of this sense that I wanted the game to feel real. And what happened is that at the beginning of the game, we were playing an early prototype, or people were playing early prototypes.
Okay, that did scare me. I'm sorry.
So there are. I just mentioned that we didn't really do the jump scare thing, but there are a few in the game. Ironically, it came about unintentionally.
Let's try this again. Yeah, keep on. Yeah.
There's an enemy that's called like a leaper, or that everyone calls a leaper, and it's actually, that's not what we called it, but we didn't call them anything in the game because I wanted this sense that you didn't know what they were, and they didn't have like little gamey names or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And so what happened was that I wanted it to charge at you. But the way that I was imagining it charging at you was like 1/3 the speed that it does right now, and so when it got put in the code by Rick, who was helping me on the game, like it just flew right at you, and it freaked me out, and I was like, that is way too fast, and I was like, wait a minute, that might be perfect.
That definitely did get me there.
Yeah,
I'm glad I wasn't on camera there.
Yeah, so that's one that there's a couple enemies.
Just
What?
Sorry, go for it. Oh, go for it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so there were actually a lot of enemies in the game came about, and I didn't think that they would work out as well as they did. I was just designing them, like, to make them, like, gameplay-wise very different from one another, and then all of a sudden, like, some of them, like, worked out really well that way, which was kind of ironic.
Yeah. So, kind of mentioned genres earlier. Was this like when you were prototyping it and you're just starting to design it? Did you think that this would become like a horror type game or not? How did it evolve? The idea behind it evolve?
Originally, it wasn't supposed to be that way, and this is kind of like, this goes back to this one-to-one and all these things that sort of happened in the game. Like, originally, when I designed it, it was almost like a buddy picture where, like, I wanted you and your co-pilot were kind of like, if you would go with Cowboy Bebop, or if you're gonna go Star Wars, you go like Han and Chewie or something like that. Where like you've got this like you owe gangsters money, and you're going into this Bermuda Triangle of spaceships to try and like get rich quick by salvaging stuff, right? And it quickly became apparent, like, and this is what I'm talking about with like listening to the game. So someone was talking to me. It was actually Jim Crawford, and he was talking about like he was like, yeah, this game is really cool. He's like, and you know what no one has done that I've seen before is zombies in space.
Dude, I heard something in the vent, by the way. That's why I'm moving out of that room right now. So, okay, zombies in space type thing, yeah.
Right. So immediately when I heard that, I was like, I was just like, no zombies. But then the thing that it made me think about was the fact that, yeah, like if you have all these derelict spaceships, having this sort of buddy picture like thing is kind of interesting, but like it seems like it lends itself so much more to everybody's dead, right?
Yeah.
So if everybody's dead, then that's not as funny. And then all of a sudden the game was tense when people were like roving around, because it felt very much like that scene in Aliens where like Gorman's sending the Marines in and they're all like looking through these staticky like cameras. Yeah. And all of a sudden I was just like, all right, you know what? Like the game is kind of telling me that what it needs to be is it needs to be like more about like survival horror, and it also needs to be more about like you being alone, because everybody's dead. So if you have a co-pilot, that doesn't really work, right? Because now all of a sudden you're not alone, and it's not as creepy. And if these are space Marines instead of robots, then again, you're not alone. And so there were a lot of decisions that I was starting to justify by this sort of sense of, like if you will, like tension and being alone and having this survival horror vibe to it. And so the game just kind of kept evolving, and I kept kind of revolving things around it. The whole one-to-one thing that you talk about with like you are at the keyboard, again, that came about because like I wanted the game to feel real. I wanted the game to feel real because like you can pilot drones. Like, I mean, if they were Space Marines right now, you don't like drag a reticle over people and this click and they run somewhere. Yeah. Like that doesn't feel real to me. And if it doesn't feel real, then it's not going to feel visceral and scary, right? And so all of a sudden I was like, all right, let's remove all that stuff from like the game. And one of the other problems is that people were like, they would look at the drones and they would immediately think they were the drone, or that they were a party of drones. And I was like, no, you're the drone operator. And I was trying to figure out how to get that to come across. And the problem is that like every way that we thought of, like you see a bank of monitors and then your head like moves and slowly sits down and then you zoom in on one of them, right? All of them required you to be playing the drone operator instead of being drone operator, right? Like if you see in your view, and like this happens in games and it's fine sometimes, but like I see like I'm waking up and there's my hand and all this stuff, and I'm like, I'm not waking up. That's not my hand. That's some avatar's hand. So it's like I'm playing the person in the game, and that's fine. But like I wanted you to be the person in the game. So that's why at the beginning of the game we have like a BIOS boot screen to say like this is your computer, like your keyboard that you're at, that's your keyboard, and your monitor, that's your monitor. And so we never break that. We never show your hand or move your head or anything like that. Your monitor is one-to-one with the monitor. And what's really cool about that is we get a ton of comments now about people who like either go in the basement or whatever, they turn off the lights. They actually go there because it's kind of cold. I've had people tell me that they've gone into their cold basement, turned on like a heater to make them feel like they were kind of in some like metal cockpit in space, put on the headphones, and like you've got the right monitor glowing, and they'd imagine that they're in a spaceship.
That is so interesting. Like and that's such kind of a pure role-playing type scenario that's going on. Like with me, it's a little bit different. I'm just out here in my office, and I feel like I'm down here in Austin, Texas, and somewhere far away, I'm sending commands to drones.
Right.
Yeah. I just love how effective that is.
Yeah, and you've seen it this year a bit, right? Like I mean, her story kind of does this. Hacknet sort of does this.
Yeah, DEF CON.
Yeah, like you see it, and they're pretty rare before, I felt, and like now all of a sudden there are a couple games that are not only not shying away from command line or text entry, but also not shying away from this whole one-to-one, like you are on the computer kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's hard to, as someone who has tried to talk to devs about it and describe, like, it's very tricky to pin down. Like, it's easy to talk about, and it's very easy and enjoyable to see in the game, but like, what do you call that? Like, is that a genre or like a trope of game design? Like, how?
Yeah, I guess we don't really have a name for it. I call it like one-to-one, or I describe it as like you're not playing the character, you are the character. But yeah, I don't know if there's a terminology for that.
Yeah.
There's probably some fancy term that is like embodying a, like when role playing instead of like playing an avatar, playing as the actual person.
Well, one word that like comes in from sort of film analysis is that you would say that like the command line in your computer, you'd say these things are diegetic. Everything
Yes.
is in the world of the game. It's a weird though, because you're usually using diegetic to refer to things that may seem extraneous, like music or sound cues or visual cues that
Right.
may or may like movies these days tend to use like visual cues can be literal, but sometimes they're not. But even like a camera in a movie might be diegetic. So here the interface is diegetic, because you think in games interface is usually not diegetic. It's usually a gateway between you and the magical things that are happening. But here it is the magical things that are happening.
That's
You are
so
the magic. Oh, huh.
Yeah, I guess you're right. We could talk about that for a while. What I wanted to ask since we got on, Tim, is like, what's up with your background in game design? Because this is like a strange departure from your prior work at Misfits, and I gather your career has not always been like solely in indie game design. Like, it's gone through all kinds of places, right? Like, what else have you worked on?
Yeah. So when I started, when I was in college, I thought computer graphics. So I was like, games or film, and so I started in games at Rainbow Studios. We worked on games like ATV Off-Road Fury 2 and Splashdown, and like a bunch of like sort of extreme sports games on console. But I burnt out on that really fast because the hours you worked were horrible, and it's just the environment. It was just too young of an industry, and it was too much about sort of exploiting people out of college that are willing to work like all the time. And so I went over into film because I was like, maybe that's better. It's a more mature industry, and I was fortunate. That I went to DreamWorks Animation, which is sort of like this bastion amongst like if you're in live action animation, if you're in like live action effects, then it can be really brutal, and even in animation it can be. But I felt like DreamWorks did a great job. I generally worked a 40 to 50 hour week, worked with incredible people on really cool projects and stuff like that. Everything from like Shrek 2, Madagascar, How to Train Your Dragon, all that kind of junk. Doing effects work, and which was kind of the same thing, where it's like this merger of like art and code. So if you're developing like a system for fire or for foliage moving or whatever, and that was really fun. But as time went on, I just kept getting the itch, and I really I felt like games was more interesting to me because there were more problems. Everything that you're sort of doing in a film, and then add interaction, right? So I just always loved gameplay, and so I decided if I was going to go back into games, I wasn't going to go back in and get, pushed around by some company, yeah. And so I was like, when XNA came about, and like all of these, tools, and now there's Unity and Unreal being free to develop on until XNA, all this stuff didn't exist back in the day, and so like. I was thinking like the company I was working at, like Rainbow, I need these $20,000 like dev kits, and I need like office space and all this stuff. So when all of a sudden the kind of GarageBand sort of developer came back, I was like, I'm all about it. So we saved up, and that's when I jumped off and made a virus named Tom. That did well enough to sort of put us on the scene, and we got in a Humble Bundle, and we got a deal with Sony to put it on the Vita, and then with Duskers we got indie funded, which was incredible. And then we made Duskers, and it's been getting a lot of critical acclaim, and it paid back my investors and stuff like that. So it's like it's been a pretty good ride. We're pretty we're pretty lucky that everything has kind of fallen in place like this.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. It's funny that like you got out of what you might consider AAA dev because it was too much like being a drone, and you're just being ground up. And now you made a game about grinding up drones.
Yeah.
I loved ATV Off-Road Fury, by the way. That was
cool. It was a really super fun game, like, and it came bundled with some of the PS2s, so like a lot of people actually do know that game. Yeah, no,
also,
that was a fun game.
I totally made a mistake on that last run there. Like, if anyone watching wants to see an incompetent drone operator, you can, this is it. It's happening in front of you. I forgot to dock the ship, so I just opened up a door into space, I think, or I'm not sure what happened exactly.
It's definitely a game that like sets you up. It's just like, okay, here's all these places to trip. Like, let's see you trip.
Yeah. It takes a level of concentration too.
Because
I'm kind of trying to listen and talk.
Yeah, and play a game.
Yeah.
I feel for streamers, man. Like, to be able to talk, look at chat, like operate a game, and then everybody's judging. Everyone's just like, why did you do that? And it's just like, come on.
It's funny, like, do you ever think about trying to make games specifically for streamers? Like, now we talked to a lot of devs who look at Twitch as their primary venue for marketing. And like why would you ever want to make a game that was really tricky to play in an entertaining way on a stream?
Yeah, see, stuff like that worries me a little bit, right? Like, whenever it's really hard because there's this really like difficult line to walk between like trying to make a game because you think it's going to be awesome and then trying to make a game that will sell well. And you're trying to do both. That's like the ideal world, right? Because it's like you want to make another game. It's very hard to do that if you don't have any money from the previous game, or at least enough success that other people will give you money. So I've heard that a lot from people that are like, oh yeah, we're going to design this around streaming. And I think that part of my brain is like, that's incredibly cool because that's a space that hasn't been explored, and there's lots of fun that can be had with that. And I always used to think like, oh man, like if there was like a lot of people tuning in to watch a game, would it be cool to allow them to, I was like way back before streaming and all this stuff, I was like, oh, wouldn't it be crazy if you were in a Coliseum and you were fighting and then like everybody could hit buttons to make it cheer louder, so like they were actually responding to what was going on and like how intense that would feel. So I think you can do like a lot of cool things with that. The other part of my brain is like a little grossed out by it because all of a sudden it's like you're sort of, instead of like trying to come up with something that seems really interesting to you, you're trying to like sort of follow some marketplace and like maybe do some gimmicky thing that would like allow you to have a bunch of sales. So it's the same thing as you put any kind of new technology in, like VR or like anything where, VR is a little bit different because instead of it being a platform controlled by one holder, it's like kind of a technology. I guess you can say the same thing for streaming. But yeah, so these are the kind of things you rack your brain with. The way that I usually do it is because I am a brat. I usually just design games. I come up with a lot of game ideas from wherever they're coming in my head, and then I try and obviously do the one that I feel of them has a good chance. So it's like, at the beginning, I might do something like, hey, if I can make it procedurally generated, I will, because that makes it better for, a YouTube series or stream. But if the game doesn't work with that, then the game doesn't work with that.
Has that worked out well for you with Duskers so far?
Yeah, with Duskers, I think Duskers is a horrible example that would probably encourage a lot of indie devs to make very, very poor marketing decisions. The fact that the game has a command line interface, like you talked about, like, diegetic stuff, like, because music felt not real to me and it felt non-diegetic, I didn't put music in the game. So, like, there are a lot of decisions in this game that are I guess the word would be ballsy for somebody that wants to actually make money making a video game. Because I was culling out, like, swaths of, like, audience and, the screenshots for the game, and also, like you always say, like, convey your mechanics and everything about your game in the screenshots, and the screenshots for this game are like, what the
I'm glad that there is no music, because, the fact that you didn't include music because you felt that that would hurt the one-to-one like thing that you were going for. I mean, you know what I do? I turn on Spotify and I listen to music on my console that is controlling drones, like somewhere, you know, like
Right.
I think if there was somebody else choosing the soundtrack of it, that would break the 1-to-1.
Yeah, and we did debate like making it so that you could import like music tracks and then play them through like a more tinny speaker like that was in the hull around you. We just ran out of time. I thought that would have been really fun.
I really don't like it when I don't get the motion ability at the beginning. Thanks a lot.
What do you got? What do you have?
I have stealth. That's how I'm gonna have to scope rooms out.
Right. You got
Going in
lure
there.
too, it looks like.
Yeah, I do. Oh yeah, I have that. But I don't know.
Don't worry,
I'm just kind of scared, Tim.
Stealth and lure are a good combo. You can stealth into a room, drop a lure, back out, open up all the doors to that room, and anything around will come for that lure.
That's not some advanced drone piloting there. Yeah.
The only thing I forgot about, and I honestly, back in the day, there weren't patrol bots, and now the patrol bots, they're not only like not super attracted to lures, but then they also, I think, yeah, so they can wander out and stuff like that. So it used to be that the lure was like super overpowered, where like you could just drop it in a room, open up all the doors around it, wait, and then close all the doors and know that they were all in there. But now, because of the patrol bots, like you can't be. It's pretty sure, but you're not like absolutely guaranteed. But for me, because I've played the game way too much, like the patrol bots aren't what scares me.
What does scare you?
The friggin' the slime. It's the most ironic thing in the world, man. Like, I made this enemy, and I was like, you know what it's gonna do? All the other enemies, like, come after you, like, really fast, and, you know, they're attacking. And I was like, I'm just gonna make one that just grows incredibly slowly. And the only reason I did that is so that it would block off paths, so you had to find a more creative way to get back. Little did I realize how effective that would be at killing me. Like, I die to that stuff all the time, because either I underestimate it, or I get, like, trapped in, you know, and it's like the most like anticlimactic way to go. It's just like, oh really? I died because like some like bacterial ooze stuff is like seeping out of the wall. Like that's how I died. Like the slowest, most boring way, right? I couldn't believe how effective it was.
Is it scary when the AI you implemented in your own game kills you?
In unique and disturbing ways.
Yeah.
So one time when you write the code, you're like, no, it's not doing that. But like, I swore that they were working together to kill me, because I opened a door and I had stealth on, okay? And as I'm driving in, there is a line of slime across like the doorway that I couldn't have seen because it was like it only picked up when I got in there. So as soon as I drove over that, my stealth disengaged, right? And then there was a brute or a leaper in there that just jumped and killed me. So it was like one of them like laid in wait to like knock out my stealth system, and then the other like pounced on me. And I was just like so angry at them for like working together.
Clever girl.
Isn't that
right?
Isn't that weird? Like I talked to for example, like Thomas Grip, I was talking to him about the monster AI, and in Soma, and he was talking about like how the brain it fills in the blanks, and it kind of makes stuff up, and it tries to explain things that happened. It sounds like half of the intensity and the scariness in a game like Sona, or even like this, it's kind of like you're coming up with it on your own because there's so much unknown. And then the people who actually coded the AI, they're just like, I didn't. Yeah, that wasn't me. That's like all happening in your brain.
The AI in this game is insanely simple, and their pathfinding and everything in this game is super simple. But the thing is that because of the low fidelity of information, and because of the sound design where you're like hearing bumps, and like we do allow you to hear swarms like through doors and stuff like that. So yeah, most of this game is about freaking out about the enemies that you do not see and that you do not know. And if you're playing it, I mean, there's stealth and a few things like that, but if you're playing the game perfectly, you're not seeing these things because you're herding them around, or you're pushing them out of airlocks, or you're doing all all these ways of not seeing them. And so yeah, so that's the thing is it's like that red line that's moving back and forth faster because there's motion is scarier than like showing you some model of something, because then you see it again and again. Whereas like it's the same thing with the look. Some of these drones, like the drone view, is kind of like an edge detection, like SLAM type, sending out rays to see what's around us, and it's not the way that we're used to seeing the world. And so it creates this kind of, my hope was it creates this sort of like Rorschach type thing where certain objects look really weird and you're like, what is that? And then your mind starts to play with you, right?
Yeah. So we should probably dig into the most obvious question, which is like, now that you've wrapped this up and shipped it, like what did you learn? And like, could you apply anything you learned from this project to your future work, or is this like such a unique one-off kind of weird, spooky thing?
I think that I can apply. Oh, no. I think I can apply.
Stop laughing at me.
I think I can apply a couple things that I learned from this game that kind of shocked me. I think the most important thing that I'm taking away from this game is that like I actually can convey things that I didn't think I could convey. Like I wouldn't have thought that I could convey like this whole one-to-one thing, or like this amount of tension, or like feeling isolated, or like making like all of these decisions that I made that just seemed kind of crazy. Like they were all so focused on like making a player feel a certain thing that like, because every decision was revolving around that, and I was willing to make major decisions revolving around that, I was able to convey that intent. And I wouldn't have thought that that would have been possible, that like people would actually get what I was throwing down, and they did. So it just kind of encourages me to be as ridiculous on other projects, right? I don't know. I mean, I am a firm believer that like it's very easy to go on tilt as a game developer and be like, oh well, like Duskers did really well and that really hit the mark, and it's getting these mentions for like game of the year type stuff, so that's just like the next game is going to either be that or better, right? And I think that's an easy trap to fall into. So I'm trying to be like, well, it worked in this instance and it won't work in all instances. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I was actually in the talk I was giving, since it's so fresh in my brain, I was saying that some of the things that I did was to, instead of having like these design pillars up front, I allowed myself to explore the space and like let the game kind of teach me what it was, and then evolve those pillars as I went. And another thing was like going after emotion instead of like features. I feel like a lot of times people list features out and they're like, okay, what we're gonna hit is we're definitely gonna nail like like exploration or something like that. Whereas if you say something like realism or isolation, or like what's our relationship with technology or something like that, then that can be so much more pervasive, because when you're talking about something, that can affect like sound design, it can affect like UI, and you can see how it's seeped in, like all of these things that we're talking about have seeped into like every corner of the game, and I think that's what makes the game feel cohesive and atmospheric. And so I feel that maybe a lot of times people aren't like setting up the right sort of pivots, for like the game's experience.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear about that, because this game seems like it is of a piece, like it's holistic. It has one central like theme and guiding, like I hate using these vague terms, like a guiding vision. And to hear you say that it was not at all envisioned to be this when you set out is striking. And I wonder, you didn't ever go through Kickstarter early access, right? This was purely just released.
We didn't do Kickstarter, but we did do early access.
How did that affect the way you shaped it? Like, 'cause you're talking about like just trying to explore what you can do with systems and like sort of narrowing down what fits best. Like, how did player input during EA actually like shape that?
So that was really cool. There actually was like what I would call like a sort of minor design pillar that came up from the community, because they were playing my game so much and loving it so much that they were seeing some things in it that like I just wasn't privy to. I just didn't see. I was too close. Or maybe not close enough, I guess, because it's like when in aggregate, your community can like know your game almost better than you. So they got really mad at one point. There's radiation can flood in rooms, and it doesn't give you a warning. It just kind of floods, and then you've got to deal with it, right? And it goes kind of slow, and it doesn't hurt you super bad, but everyone was getting really annoyed by it. And my knee-jerk reaction as a pretentious indie developer was, you guys, I tell you that the ship is unstable when you enter it, so you need to prepare for that eventuality like a big boy, right? And like deal with it, right? But then I started listening more because there were more and more people getting annoyed by it, and I'm like, these guys aren't complaining. You know, you get your player that complains that the RNG is like, you know, against them and all this stuff, right?
I agree with that one after that last run.
Yeah, but like. And so this wasn't like a common thing. Like these players were like these weren't the type of people who were just, you know, complaining about like a random thing. They were complaining about a very specific thing, and these were like longtime players. And so I started thinking more and more about it, and I was like, what's the big deal here? And I realized like everything in Duskers is about like sort of adapting to survive, right? Like things break down, like situations change, all that stuff. But every time I ask you to adapt, like there's a MacGyver type moment where I give you a moment to come up with a plan, right? Like something's chewing on the door. You've got about 60 seconds before they chew through that, and now you've got to come up with an alternate plan, right? It's the same thing with like asteroids are coming in like 8 minutes or whatever, right? Like, so you've got to figure out like how you're going to contain that or run away or whatever you're going to do. And with radiation, I wasn't doing that. Radiation, I was just like, bam, there's the thing, and now respond. And the game wasn't really about like dexterity or reaction time or anything like that. The real-time elements of the game are really to add tension and fear, right? So I realized if I added a ship creak, and then about 30 seconds later to 45 seconds later, radiation might leak somewhere, then you don't know where it's going to happen or even if it's going to happen, but now all of a sudden you have to stop and come up with a plan. And that's almost better than like just reacting and being like, get out of that room, seal off that room. Like actually being like, oh my god, I have like 30 seconds and like all the doors are open, so if any room floods with radiation. The other great thing is that like to be a total jerk, instead of like giving them one room that's a problem, they have to consider every room as a problem, like potentially. And that worked out really well. So it was kind of like my audience was like co-designing the game and being like, hey, this is something consistent and cohesive and holistic about your game, except for this one place, and you need to fix that. So that was kind of cool.
I like how.
Sorry, Brian, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, you were just chopping out.
Am I chopping out now?
No, now you're fine.
I was going to say was you've just on so many times on this call. I don't know, like how do you feel about that sometimes when you're you're dictating to your players things, but sometimes you're like telling them that it's going to be a certain way and that's it. That's what you want. Like that sounds like an interesting thing to like constantly refer to yourself as.
I got everything except what was I referring to myself as?
Oh, it's a jerk.
Oh, yes. So whenever you're making a game that has a high level of difficulty, or kind of like roguelike or whatever, then you are going to take on the role of antagonist to your players, sort of in a way, right? I mean, A Virus Named Tom was also a deceivingly difficult game, and so Duskers is a very brutal game, and so you have to take that on the chin sometimes. Like, my favorite example of this is that in the game, how are we going to ramp up difficulty, right? So in a traditional, well, not in a traditional, so in a game that I like to cite a lot for like good design is FTL, right? And in FTL you have like you're going left to right, right? So things are just going to get more difficult as you go right. However, in this game, I really believe in the whole like nesting dolls thing. So because you're exploring a derelict spaceship, I wanted you to explore galaxies. Explore solar systems, explore galaxies, explore the universe. So if you can go any direction, how do I ramp level of difficulty? One thing you could do is make it that at the center, it's the least difficult, and then the further you get away from that center, it's more difficult. But again, like one of my big design pillars was realism, and it just didn't feel right to me that like if you went here, you'd be like, oh, I'm going to go back in closer to the center to go to an easy one, and then because now all of a sudden I'm playing a game, and that meta game is like kind of ruining the immersion for me. So what I decided to do was just make it so that the difficulty was somewhat random. We ramped it up slightly. We didn't make it like super difficult at the beginning, but like you could come across something very difficult very quickly. And so what this does is there's a double-edged sword here, right? So what you're doing is I'm allowing player stories to be more full, right? I'm allowing you to have a player story where you're like, dude, on the second system I went to, it was super hard. I can't believe I got out of that. Whereas opposed to if I just ramped it up gradually, everyone would have that same. The player stories would be very different, but like I'm removing player stories at the cost of, and it feels real and visceral. You're always worried. You don't know, if it's going to be hard or whatever, right? And at the cost of frustrating new players, right? Because some new players are like, dude, this is way too hard, way too early. Or like my first run was great because like the kid gloves were on and then you took them off and now it's like really brutal. And so to mitigate that a little bit, we added options in that makes the game like easier. But yeah, I think that sometimes you just have to like, shit or get off the pot. You're just like, all right, well, I mean, we've got to figure out what we're doing here. And are we going to placate people? Are we going to, and sometimes there aren't always decisions that make everybody happy.
When I do die in this game, or when I lose all my drones anyway, and then assumably fired by my boss, it doesn't. It's interesting. I like the idea of the MacGyver aspect. First of all, because I watched that show a lot when I was a kid, and also I don't feel cheated necessarily because it feels like the tools are there to survive, and it's just space is tough, and sometimes you're going to you're going to screw up and you're going to lose all your drones. But could you have gotten out of that situation? Yeah, I mean, there's a good chance, like, you probably maybe could have gotten out of that if you would have been a little bit more prepared and on your toes. So I like that, and I love FTL, but I feel like you have in this one, which is like it gives you a little bit more control over your fate. I feel like. Right.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that like I think that as long as you feel that way, that's the strongest parts in the moment. I mean, the strongest moments in the game are when you think that there is no solution and that you can't get out of there, and then you're like, wait a minute, I've got like a lure and like a sensor, like how could I use those to like get out of this situation? And if it wasn't punishing and it didn't, and it kind of, those moments were always there, then they wouldn't feel genuine and amazing when they happen, right?
Yeah. By the way, I just blew something out the airlock. So that's satisfying.
You can do it again. oh, that one. Yeah. It's super. That's like, I think there are two moments at the beginning of the game that everybody loves, and either what they do is they do it to themselves, or they do it to the enemy. But one of those is sucking something out of an airlock, because we don't teach that in the tutorial, right? And then they're like, wait a minute, what if I? And then they're like, oh my god! And then usually, like, accidentally they suck one of their drones out into space. And it's the same thing with the ship defenses, that you can turn those on. Everyone loves that, when all of a sudden there's a red line going back and forth, and then it turns into a green line, and you're like, ha-ha! And then they open up the door, and then they drive in, and it shoots them, inevitably.
Yeah, it feels like you're really doing something there, because, you have one drone on the interface controlling stuff, and then then you're sitting there at your computer, just like kind of herding the enemy into the correct room. It's just like such a satisfying feel when you do that.
Yeah. Anytime that you feel that you've gone aggressive on these enemies, it feels pretty awesome, because so much of the time you feel like you are at their, mercy.
So I'd be curious, Tim, how big was the team on Duskers? Like, was it just you? Was there a small coterie? Like, what we're looking at?
So it was myself, one full-time developer named Jeremy Phillips, one very 10-hour-a-week developer, Rick, and then we had a 2-day-a-week artist, Brendan Morrow, and previous to him was Jillian Ogle, and then we had a handful of sound. And I do this a lot, like with sound, for whatever reason. I end up working with like multiple sound people, but I did it on a virus named Tom, so I brought back Keith Moore and Ian Hicks from that, and then I stole Robert Arnott during the final months of development, because I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a game called Capsule.
Yeah,
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing job of creating a gritty sci-fi, lo-fi tech vibe. You know, it's got like a bent CRT with scan lines and stuff like that. And Adam Saltzman did it.
Yeah.
And Robin Arnott did the audio for it, and it was amazing. And so toward the end of the project, he was working on Sound Self, but he was a little bit burnt out from that, and he was just kind of looking for like a sort of a mistress game on the side, like, to kind of get him. You know, sometimes you're just so entrenched in your game, and so I was like, oh man, that would be awesome. So he added a little bit more like ship ambience and stuff like that to the sound design. It was really cool.
So I think you can actually
so
download. Correct me if I'm wrong. At least you could at one point download it for free, or
Capsule.
Yeah.
I think so. They had it on their website, and then they finally got it on Steam.
Yeah. So if you're watching, you should check that out if it's free, and you should buy it if it's not free.
Yeah, it's a small game, but it's just a really great example of doing, like, going, and this is what gave me inspiration to do it, right? Like when I saw Capsule, I was like, oh man, like I can do this, right? And so it's just about like going. We got the writer people on the show here. I need a better analogy for like, or metaphor for like when you have like laser focus on something and like you're just like, you will not, like everything revolves around that, like the black hole of that nougaty center. Because like my analogy at first was like, oh, it's like, you know, like a pit bull locking its jaw on something, but that's like a horrible thing because I had 2 pit bulls and they're wonderful dogs, so I hate to like keep that like that motif about them going. So I need something, guys.
Oh, it's easy. Well, you're a mouse and you got your cheese right in front of you, and you need somebody else to come in and be like, "Hey, I got." No, that's not so good. I'm sorry.
No, I think that's perfect, Alex.
I see what you mean. Like you need somebody who's coming in to give a fresh perspective on something and like really show you what it is. Like it's like the blind person touching the elephant. Like you need someone in to come in and touch the other side and be like, oh, over here, like you didn't see this, but there's like a trunk here and like there's some tusks. It's gonna be really cool. Let me show you.
Right.
I believe isn't the phrase literally missing the forest for the trees?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm thinking of more is that the fact that I feel like a lot of games, like they'll be like, okay, we're gonna do like a retro sci-fi aesthetic, and then they'll kind of like, you know, they'll work on that in the art direction of the game a little bit, but it won't seep into like every aspect of the game. Like, I kind of view it like if you want to call them design pillars, whatever, I kind of view them because sometimes they change and sometimes you have new ones. So it's not like this like house this blueprint for this house that you have. It's like you're figuring out how to build the house as you're going, which is really weird. But like the thing is that they're more like celestial bodies. They're more like black holes or like, you know, just high gravitational things that everything in your game is being affected by. Right, and being driven by those things, and instead of them just being like, oh, this area is this and this area is that. And I think this obviously isn't. There's no one way to make games. I think this is just a strong way to make games if you want to have a strong player fantasy and to have a cohesive emotional resonance like throughout it. Right, like this, I feel like, and so like that focus on that I saw in Capsule more than anything else because I was like, wow, these guys weren't just like, we're gonna make this feel like you're in this capsule and there's gonna be kind of like some static effect that we'll just throw on top. It was like in like the DNA of that game was that every decision revolved around.
It's like every decision you make is thematically has a thematic foundation, and you decide on what those themes are early on. Like the theme isn't guy in a spaceship, just like Star Wars theme isn't a guy in a spaceship. It's about bigger things than that. And then with it's just like, you know, writing or you're designing a character or something, like you like are the decision or the story beats serving this theme that you're trying to convey. It's hard when you're writing, and it's probably like from an engineering standpoint even harder when you're working in software.
Right. And I think that's a big part of it. I think it's kind of like saying, like, you know, what ingredients do you put in this thing, and it really matters that if you have a sandwich that like you have really good bread or whatever. I think the problem is that a lot of times game developers will go in and they'll just like like I'm saying, like these things will be features, and it's hard to do because making a game where these themes or pillars or whatever you want to call them come about over time and are also very emotion and feeling based, that means that the game is incredibly floaty, and like that means that you don't have a defined vision of the game as you're making it, and that's very scary, because it was very scary for me, like throughout the production of Duskers, like especially in the first like 9 months to a year, like I was not sure if this game was fun, like because there was a lot, like it was like, you know, I'm growing, and this is what also creates it, make it feel so novel, right? Is that like I'm just like kind of growing these roots to plant this. I've planted the seed, and then I hit like rock, and I'm like, I can't grow that way. That's not working. And then I start growing down deeper, and I'm worried that there's like a bowl of rock, and like I won't be able to break through, right? But I don't know that until I'm like, so it's a very scary way to develop a game, and it's also a very like like if you were like a AAA studio and you had a big team and you had like a certain budget and it was a sequel or whatever, like this would be the worst way to do it. But I think for a game where you're trying to do something different and you're just trying to discover, I think the benefit of this is that if at the beginning you're like, my supposition is that A, B, and C will make a fun game, right? Whereas like what I'm saying is like, you know what, I think A will, and like now as I'm playing this and I'm making it, B wasn't right, like I think we should go more toward like F, you know? And then you keep like evolving that, and you're just, you know, you're getting more information by iterating.
Is that what you mean by exploring the space? You mentioned that earlier as a theme of your talk.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like I'll sit there and I was playing around just driving drones in the dark, and I was like, wow, this feels really tense, you know? Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, what if, because originally the game was actually sort of like a tower defense game where your drones were like turrets that you would set up, and you wouldn't want anything to be able to get back to your ship. But then as I was playing that, I was just like, you know what? Like this has an optimal strategy of placing the turrets at pinch points, and the exploration isn't really that fun because it's just go to the next door and open it, you know? Like, so that wasn't working. So it was like, all right, it's like we got to back that out. What's broken right now? It's not the drones in the dark driving around. That's really fun, right? It's not like that tension. It's not, it's the exploration is failing and combat is failing, right? So that's when we stopped focusing on combat. We were like, you know?
Yeah.
What I think is really interesting to me about this process is not so much, you know, the early days, whether it was the first 6 months or first year, where you were like just trying to explore and figure out what feels good and follow that. But like as you started to wrap up and you had a stronger idea of what Duskers should be, like how did you distance yourself from what you thought it should be and able to bring yourself up to what it actually should be, if that makes sense? Like talking about early access, like when you sort of had a little bit of resistance to making a change that you thought was really critical to the way the game should be. I imagine like how do you let go of that? How do you, like, if Robin needed a break from Sound Self, like how do you get a break from being immersed in a game like this for so long?
Yeah, it's really hard and it's really stressful, and it's like you become so intimately involved in it, and you kind of see that, you know, when you watch like Indie Game the movie or anything like that. You see how like it starts to become like that your identity is so tied up in the success of this game, or at least like the acceptance of it, right? So yeah, it's really, really hard, and I haven't found a good way to do it. I just dive in, I get completely obsessed, and then usually after I launch, there's like a month after that I'm like really supporting the game and then I reach this saturation point where I just have to walk away, and then I feel really guilty because like right now on my forums I used to be on them like every day answering everything, and then I just had to walk away. So usually that's the point that I do it. Sometimes there's a lull like right toward as you're wrapping up, because it starts to become like polished and, you know, just making everything feel right and making sure the tutorial works and stuff like that, and it's not as sexy yet.
But that's an important ability, though, to be able to walk away when you're a small studio, like you're an independent developer. And, you know, I've talked to plenty of game developers who find it very hard to walk away, and their lives are consumed and their quality of life is hurt because of that.
You definitely go through a depression after you launch a game, because there's no way, the way I always justify it, I was like, there's no way that you can be pouring your heart and soul into something for like 2.5, 3 years and then have anything to do with its launch like meet expectation. Like if the world doesn't explode, you know, then there wasn't enough of a reaction. Like the world didn't change,
Yeah.
It's kind of like the really weird feeling when like when my wife got pregnant and like over those 9 months, like she was going through changes and I wasn't. Like I was just like, I feel exactly the same, right? Like, and then but then eventually the culmination of that is a human child that you deal with every day. So it's like
that has impact there. That has impact.
Yeah, right? So like when you launch a game, even if, and this is the ironic part, even if, like, I mean, look at Duskers. Like, I mean, it's like, we got, like, so much love from, like, Polygon, Rock, Paper, Shotgun, you name it, right? Like, and, like, all the, like, the fans, because it's such a niche game, they get so behind it, and it's so great. And then we made money, and I was able to pay back Indie Fund and stuff. Even with all that stuff, like, it's like, you're still waiting every day. You're just like, I've put so much work and all this effort into it. Like, it's like it's almost, maybe it's because it's digital and like everything is on a keyboard and you're just like typing to people and stuff like that. And it's not like when you make a film and you can go to the movie and like hear everybody laugh in the theater,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, there's some disconnect. And so then almost always there's like a depression where it's just like,
it's like a feedback vacuum that
everything, all your heart and all your soul, and you've been running and all that stuff, and then it's out, and then it's just like you're just all the adrenaline just drops.
I definitely have talked to a lot of particularly independent developers who will find any excuse not to launch the game. It needs to tweak it. I got to fix this, and this, and then I'll do it. A year later, it's not there yet.
Yeah, and you have to draw the line. Like I probably spent too long on Duskers, even though like I really wish we had more time to polish it and add some more sound design and stuff in there. Like you just have to reach a point. I've always reached a point where I'm like, okay, we've got to finish this, and now this is the due date or whatever. And I always, when I make that decision, feel like I'm doing it a little too early. And then after we launch, I'm like, I held on too long. Like I'm like, wow, like yes, this is out now, and I should have done
that.
This.
That is
like,
such a common story. So, I don't know what to even do about that. I think that's just like that's how creators are, who particularly ones who release something commercially. It's just part of the deal. I think.
Yeah, it's just part of the process. It makes it easier when you've gone through it once, right? Like, so like, because I had done it with a virus named Tom, because I had launched so many movies and so many games before. But when you're part of a bigger company, it's like not your baby.
Yeah.
And so you're not, and you haven't invested so much of yourself into it. So that, I think, is the really hard part.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are running out of time right here, because that was just sad, because like that was such a great talk, and I feel like we have like a million more questions about how you made Duskers. But to wrap it up, Tim, is there anything you kind of want to say to an audience of developers about like what it means to make a game like this? Like kind of any last thoughts about this kind of game development?
I guess I don't know. It's interesting because what I want to say is something super inspirational. Like, I just followed this game and like I made decisions that I felt were crazy, like putting a command line interface in. And once I did that, it like freed me up, because it was like my joke is always that I had already stolen the car, right? Like, now should I not speed? Now should I like worry about other things? So it's like that allowed me to say, okay, now there's not going to be any music in the game. Okay, you know what? Like, this is going to have like other non-traditional elements to a game that are going to be really weird. And so I would love to say that like follow that, and like don't just like chase trends and stuff like that. However, I would want to temper that with like, it worked out on this game and it might not. So it might be a wiser strategy if you're just trying to make a living doing this, to actually think a little bit more about like that you're culling your audience down. It's hard, because I always hate when I go to a talk and someone like had a successful game and they just sort of assume that everything that they do now is like, that none of it had to do with luck, and none of it had to do with like marketplace or where people were at or how this particular thing came together. It's not a one-hit wonder kind of thing. And I always think to myself, like, this is an aberration in a graph, and like, what are the odds that like my next game is gonna get like this much praise and like this like game of the year considerations and stuff like that? It just doesn't seem likely, right? So it's always hard. You want to sit there and be like, oh, I did this thing and it worked out to do this thing, but like there's so many factors. It's really hard to.
An
I never
aberration
wanna
in a
lead
graph. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for hanging out with us today, Tim. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for
And more people need to check out this game. It's like this is seriously one of the best games that I've played this year. So hopefully, get some more eyeballs on it.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. And it's super fun to come and hang out and talk about it. Good, interesting questions.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I think that's it.
Well, cool.
Go ahead, Brian.
See you, everyone.
Right.
Okay.
We need to work on our end on our live stream ending. We're still kind of new at this. Tim, why don't you sign us off, Tim?
This has been Gamasutra. Don't see this next week when we do whatever you guys are gonna do.
Yeah. Make games.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Tim. Bye, Bryant. Bye,
right.
Alex. We'll figure out the
Tim,
ending
hang
next
on.
time.
Yeah. Hang around for a sec, Tim, because I have a question for you off